I'm Joanna Bourke, Deputy Business Editor of the Evening Standard. We're just days away from the US election, and investors are looking at what Joe Biden or Donald Trump in the White House might mean for business and investments. I'm here with Jim Armitage, the City Editor of the Evening Standard, to talk about how either win might impact the markets. Jim, I guess as we both, have seen from previous years, there's no guarantee that, anyone is a foolproof win. But looking at today's sort of findings and data, what are we potentially expecting next week as it stands?
Well, it's been quite an unusual election, really, because all the way through, Biden has been polling very, very strongly. And it seems to be getting stronger. Even today, we've got very positive news for Biden in the polls from the sort of the states that have been heavily hit by coronavirus. So this morning we've got polls coming from Michigan and Wisconsin, polling very strongly there. He's also polling better in Florida, North Carolina and Pennsylvania, those swing states that are so important. So all things being equal, we should be looking at a fairly comfortable Biden victory. But as you say, never say never in a US election.
And broadly speaking, for the markets, what is it they kind of want to see next week? What would be a good scenario either way?
Well, for markets generally, there's absolutely no doubt a Trump victory would be the dream scenario for most investors. People are saying that because we're not expecting that as the main, the most likely outcome, the markets have been kind of suggesting that won't happen. So if it does happen, that will be a huge shock and the markets will go absolutely berserk. They'll absolutely love it.
Okay, and looking specifically under the scenario of a Trump win, what are the stocks that investors might be wanting to pile into? What sectors might benefit from a Trump win?
Well, like I'm saying, if Trump wins, buy everything. Buy every stock you can, buy the dollar, because the market would love it. Basically, markets always prefer Republicans to Democrats. Trump has been, whatever you think of him, before the COVID hit, he was very good for markets. He saw very strong gains on the S&P and the Dow Jones index, and markets love him for it. In terms of sector-specific stuff, I mean, when you look at his policies, you would want to be sort of longer term. I'm talking here. You'd want to be looking at. Well, clearly he's going to be better for the oil industry. He's a big liberalizer on fracking regulations and environmental regulations. Surely that would continue under his reign. So yeah, buy oil, buy fracking stocks, buy those engineering stocks that support those sectors. Buy defence. You can bet that he'd be good for defence stocks. And as I say, buy the dollar. I think a Trump victory would send the dollar to an even stronger place.
And if Biden is in the White House, again, the same question, what might be good things to look at investing in?
Yeah, it's interesting, this perceived wisdom is that Republicans are better for markets than Democrats. But if you look back in history, the strongest bull markets, I think 3 out of the 4 strongest bull markets that we've had, if you go right back to the 20s, have been under Democrats. So there's always this fear factor about Democrats being, high tax, high employment rights, all of this stuff that share prices don't like very much. And Biden is true to form. He's saying that he will increase corporate taxes quite considerably. He's saying that he'll double the minimum wage. So this is why the markets are wary of him. I think a lot of this is already priced in, by the way. But in terms of specific sectors, I'd say you would probably be looking to sell, obviously, those kind of what I'd call wealth stocks. So he would probably be distributing wealth away from the super rich and more towards middle income and lower income families. So you might be thinking it would be a good idea to sell shares in Burberry, for example, or LVMH or Kering, those kind of prime luxury stocks. Again, I mean, that's the sort of perceived wisdom. I'd say it's probably quite marginal, to be honest, because those companies, America's only one market for them. But it's certainly a thing to think about when you're adjusting your portfolio. Also, he is he's a big talker on green and environmental stuff.
The impacts of climate change don't pick and choose. That's because it's not a partisan phenomenon. It's science.
So yeah, you should be buying green energy stocks, for example, or green technology stocks in general. He's also likely to be, I mean, it's tax and spend. So the spend side of it is likely to be infrastructure spending, for example. So there are plenty of investment funds here in the UK where they're investing in companies that do big infrastructure, road, rail, bridges, all of those kinds of things, which I think Biden would probably deliver on his promises of. Bearing in mind, Trump also said that he was going to be a big investor in infrastructure, and that never really happened. So these are politicians we're talking about. You've got to take them with a little bit of a pinch of salt. So, and it's a point that it's always worth making, and I always make this clear. People get way overexcited on either path when it comes to political in investments on general elections. They always assume that there'll be this massive change in policy if one side gets in rather than the other. Generally, it's far more slow than that. It takes a long time to get anything done in politics, as all presidents always find. And there's a flip side as well, if I may just go on, to this conventional wisdom that Biden is bad for profits. Biden is redistributing wealth. He's not just taking wealth, he's redistributing it. So those sort of middle and lower income families are going to be better off under him. They're going to have more income if they're sort of minimum wage bracket. And the new taxes that he's talking of bringing in are, $150,000 plus kind of salaries or thereabouts. So I would argue that if you are selling, middle income, middle price consumer goods, let's say, Dettol, Persil, Coca-Cola, toothpaste, that kind of stuff, you're probably going to do all right. So you could be thinking that you might be buying Unilever, for example, or Reckitt & Coleman, or Reckitt Benckiser as they now are, sorry. Those kinds of shares, Diageo as well, again, a lot of people in the London markets are saying you should be selling these stocks because they worry about the higher corporation tax that they'll be paying on their US earnings. I think that is probably a bit of a red herring. I think that they'll probably, what they lose on the swings, they'll make up on the roundabouts in terms of increased sales.
Okay, and Jim, what happens, as is always possible, in the event it's a very close result or someone disputes the result? What's that? Is that a worst case scenario for the market?
That is the disaster scenario for the markets, and it's likely that could happen. These, like I said, the polls don't say it, but we don't know until election day how it's going to pan out. Trump has been very vocal in how he's going to dispute it, and he's been saying, this election's rigged. He hates the postal votes. He says that they're all rigged. So that is a real worry for the markets, and that the sort of the not knowing is the very, very worst thing for anyone running a business and anybody investing in those businesses. So the markets would just be on for a horrendous time of ups and downs. As ever with the market, there's always people who make money out of these ups and downs. So any company involved in trading that makes money out of commissions from trading would probably do well. In the UK, you could be looking at AJ Bell, perhaps Hargreaves Lansdown, perhaps even the banks with big investment banking arms like Barclays did very, very well in the volatility in March, April. So there will always be winners. And if you get those sort of volatile times, you probably want to be shifting into your sort of what they call the safe haven stocks, maybe dividend stocks, such as your drugs companies, your tobacco companies, your insurance companies. The money comes in whatever the economic weather, and they pay good dividends, so they'd probably do well in that environment.
And just, I guess, in the news a lot at the moment, but, the US tech giants, is there one particular presidential win that might be beneficial for those businesses?
Yeah, it's a really good point, Joe. And I'm not entirely sure how that would play out because, they've had an incredible bull run in terms of their share prices. A lot of that is to do with other factors that, low interest rates mean that people are investing in higher risk assets like tech to get returns. But they've had an incredible run under the current administration, and Trump has pretty much left them alone as they've got bigger and bigger and bigger. And this is the multi-billion-dollar question: is whether Biden decides that they've got too big, and he sort of promotes potential voices that are looking to break up those big tech giants. And it's not entirely in his gift, and this could come from the sort of regulatory environment rather than the president directly saying we've got to break these things up. But we've already had some attacks on Google going through at the moment, and arguably Biden would be more likely to go for a more sort of pro-competition sort of breakup stance. And that's another good point, actually. Democrats do tend to be a little bit more interventionist on these sort of monopoly issues. So, I mean, somebody was saying to me this morning, you might want to look at the companies that do well out of litigation. Burford, for example, the litigation funder, they might do well out of fighting for or against these sort of antitrust cases that might come up as a result of Biden.
Great. And just finally, a big issue close to home. We're in the midst of our trade negotiations, Brexit. So under, which scenario, which president could be, help us or be beneficial in our trade negotiations as we go forward?
Yeah, that's another great question. There are so many variables on that, because obviously the current administration here, the Johnson administration, gets on very well with Trump. Personnel of, they're just very close. So when it comes to getting into the Brexit negotiations with them, that the trade negotiations over a US-UK deal, one hopes that they've got this bond, and that will be good for us Brits. If Biden gets in, he doesn't have that relationship, and we know from what we read in the papers that the Johnson administration has desperately been trying to make friends with with the Biden camp, even though they don't really know anybody there. So it clearly is an issue that's troubling the government here in the UK. I think, in reality, I think it's probably fair to say that for Biden, a trade deal with the UK is probably not going to be at the top of his agenda, anywhere near like it will be with Trump because of those relationships. So that is the scenario if we retain a Johnson administration here. But of course, there's plenty of speculation in Westminster, particularly amongst some of the more vociferous backbenchers, that Johnson won't be in power here and we'll have a new leadership here. So, in that case, maybe Biden and whoever the new Prime Minister is here will get on like a house on fire.
Thanks, Jim. For ongoing news and analysis, see standard.co.uk.